I was born in Mansfield, Ohio, and I was the youngest child and had 4 brothers. And my 4 brothers were Alan, James, Rodney, and Russell, and they were all older than me. And my mother was Esther and Clyde Yarman, and I grew up in Mansfield for 9 years, and then we moved to Shelby, Ohio. And as I lived in Mansfield, I recall that I went to school at Bowman Street School, which is gone now, of course. And I remember a little friend I had that was a little black girl, and she was very cheerful. And it's funny because I cannot remember her name, but we were very good friends. And I think I recall her because when we did move to Shelby, they did not allow blacks, and I could not imagine that. They did not allow blacks to live in the town. And I think that is one of the reasons I recall that little memory. And then I remember as we lived in Mansfield, we lived on McPherson Street, and there was a big, big hill. And there was no traffic back then, and we could take our sleds and slide down that hill. And then I remember in the summertime, we did not have refrigeration, so we had what they called ice box to keep our food fresh. So we had an ice man, and he would come along and he would give all the children little chunks of ice, and this was just a pleasant thing to have in the summertime. And we did not have anything such as TVs or telephones, or cell phones. And we didn't have, what we did have was radios. We had a coal stove in the middle of the front room. And my mother or father would throw chunks of coal or anything that would burn, and that would keep the front room warm. The upstairs had no heat whatsoever. And I can remember my mother used to put warm bricks at our feet, covered with like a little blanket or something to keep our feet warm. And the windows would be frosted inside, and there'd even be ice on the windowsills. And but that's about all. If we wanted to be warm, we stayed in the living room, just around the little coal stove. Oh, never heard of such a thing as air conditioning. That was just not there. We did not have a car. We more or less walked everywhere we went, or would take, they had buses and no cars. There were cars, but my folks could not afford a car. When we moved to Mansfield, I was 9 years, when we moved to Shelby, I was 9 years old. I was in the 4th grade. And I remember my school teacher, she was very young, but she had snow white hair. And I enjoyed going to school. I was 12 or 14 in that age bracket when we got our first car. In fact, I think my brother had the first car before my father did. He worked at a factory and earned money to buy the car. The house I grew up in, actually, when I was young, they rented houses, and I can remember that we moved a lot. But the houses were all similar. They were just similar to the house I live in right now. They just had like a living room and dining room, kitchen, usually about 3 bedrooms. I had to, when I was very young, I had to sleep in with a couple of my younger brothers. But as we got older, I did manage to get my own room, and the boys all slept together, like 2 to a room. Of course, my mother and father had their own room. My house had 1 bathroom for 7 people. So we sort of had to get in line. Well, when I was in my teens, and I went to high school, is when the Second World War started. And that was a sad time because when I was a senior, a lot of the boys enlisted in the war, and some of them, of course, did not come back. And that was just kind of a sad time. Oh, I remember when they attacked in Pearl Harbor, it was so unbelievable that that could happen. And we were all worried when, of course, all 4 of my brothers enlisted, and they didn't wait to be drafted. So we had that worry that all 4 of my brothers were in the war. But they all came back. I did not really lose a close friend, but there were classmates that were killed. I can remember when the Second World War was over, everybody was celebrating, they were partying, and it was just such a happy atmosphere. And everybody couldn't believe because the war had lasted so long. And it was just a godsend gift that this war was finally over. And everybody was just in such a good mood and just so happy and just cheering, and it was just wonderful. I got married when I was about a year out of high school, which was way too young. And if I had it to do over, that would not have happened, although that marriage brought me 4 wonderful children. When I was married, that first year, my mother passed away. She had cancer, and I got married when I was 19, and my mother passed away when I turned 20. And I was rather a spoiled child, being an only girl with 4 boys. So therefore, I did not ever have to do much. And when my mother passed away, I had to grow up very fast. I had a husband, and I had a brother that came home from the war, and my father that I had to take care of. I had to learn to cook. I had to learn to iron and wash clothes, and I grew up very fast. I had my first child after just a year after I was married. My first child was Bob, and not quite 2 years. Actually, it was 18 months later, I had Sue. And then 4 years later, I had Linda. And 9 years later, I had David. And it was so a joy to have all 4 children. And they were good children. And probably about Bob and Sue were teenagers. And Linda was a little, of course, younger than that. And Dave was just small. When I had to go through a difficult divorce, and I did not believe in divorce, and I would rely on my church. I would go to church and I would feel so guilty because I was going through this. And my marriage was good in the beginning, and then it got very difficult as Jack, my husband, was very, very possessive, and he was a good father, but he just was not real reliable as far as being a good husband. And it was a very, very difficult time. As the years went by, I met Bob Schaefer, and I actually met him at a street fair in Lexington, Ohio. I was there with a friend, and he invited us in for a drink, and we went in this restaurant and had a conversation, and he invited us. He owned a boat, and he invited, my friend's name was Jenny, and he invited Jenny and I down to his boat for a boat ride. Well, I decided I did not know this man. I was not going to go. Well, here it turned out he actually worked in Shelby, and I run into him at an Isley store. And because we didn't go down for that boat ride. So when he come into Isley's, we sat down and had an ice cream. And he invited us again. He says, now this time, he said, let's take our kids. Well, I thought, this guy's not so bad if we're going to take our children. So it ended up that we went and had a good time. And then he started picking me up. I worked at the Shelby Sales Book, and he picked me up and took me to work, and things advanced on until he finally proposed, and I accepted. And I always said that he was a gift from God because he was just the opposite as my first husband. Once we were married, we joined each other as a family, blended. He had 3 children, I had 4 children. His children lived with his first wife, and we would get together a lot, and a lot of it was down at the lake at this boat setting, and everybody got along. And eventually his son Bob moved over to Shelby with us, and he had 2 daughters. There was Pam and Sandy, and we just all got along quite well. Dave was about, I'd say 6 years old, maybe 7, when we got married. And one day, just before his 8th birthday, he come home from school, and he called Bob Dad, and he said, Dad, you know what I want for my birthday? And of course, Bob says, what do you want for your birthday? I want to be adopted. So Bob went over to the courthouse in Mansfield and started the proceedings immediately. I can remember when I became a grandparent, my first grandchild was Shannon, and she was born in Texas, and I flew out there to help my daughter Sue with Shannon when she was born, and that was exciting. And my second grandchild was Jeff, and that was a delight. And my third grandchild was Alicia, and my fourth grandchild, it would have been Brad. He was born in April. And my fifth grandchild was Josh. My sixth grandchild was David. And my seventh grandchild was Sarah. And then Hazel and Jeff delighted me with my great-grandchild. My first great-grandchild was Gracie. What a delight she was, or is. And after Gracie came Brooke, and after Brooke came Trent, and then we have another delight of Drew. My fourth grandchild, great-grandchild, was Priya, and she is the sweetheart, and we love her so much, and she has been a delight also. And now, Grace, my very, very first great-grandchild, is going to make me a great-great-grandmother. I was married to Bob about 26 years, and we were out playing golf one day with my two brothers and their wives, and he had a sudden heart attack. And this was so devastating. It was the first bad thing that happened that I could ever experience. He was such a good man, and he was a good father to all my children, and the grandchildren loved him dearly, and it was a great loss. When Bob passed away, I was 66 years old, and I never wanted to remarry. I'd lived alone all those years, and I think living alone, the biggest challenge that I had was when I was in my 70s, I acquired macular degeneration. I was, the first time I noticed anything with my eyes, I was sitting down at Pleasant Hill Lake, and I looked up at some fence posts, and they looked all out of shape. And I thought this was weird. And but I also then noticed on television that the people's heads looked small. And I thought, maybe I better be going to the doctor. And so I went to the eye doctor, and they diagnosed me with macular degeneration. And it was, at first, I could see quite well because it just hit my right eye. My left eye took over the eyesight, and I did quite well for several years, and then it finally did hit the left eye. And I have no central vision in the right eye but I do have a little in the left eye left. But my peripheral vision is really good. I learned to drive when I was 57 years old. All those years I thought I didn't need to drive. And once I did, I wondered why I waited so long. It was wonderful. And then when my eyesight got worse and worse, that was one of the hardest things I had to give up, was driving. One thing that got me through my bad eyesight was I always thought of people who were worse off than me. There were so many people that are actually blind, and that would help me get through the bad eyesight. My faith has gotten me through so many things. I don't know what I would do without my church. That means everything to me. It means family, friends, and I just don't know what I'd do without my faith and my church. I am most proud of my family and just that I have raised a good family. I would like to be remembered by my love for my family and my positive attitude. I think that is a gift from God. He has given me so many things that I choose to think that my glass is half full, and that I've always been able to think positive. I would say that I have probably about 3 friends, or not friends, but people that have shaped my life. One would be my mother, and she was such a good person, and she has passed on her ideas and her faith and everything she has passed on to me. And then I have a pastor that helped shape my life. That was Pastor Carl Johnson. And he really made you think, and he made you think deep and brought things out that really defined my life. And then I had a good friend, Jenny, and she brought me out of a lot of, I was sort of in a shell, and she brought me out of that. We had so much fun, and she made me more outgoing, and she introduced me to friends that I still have today. She has passed away, and she could be annoying, but she did bring out a lot of good in me. If I could relive anything, any time in my life, it would be all the good times we had down at Pleasant Hill Lake. That was a fun time of my life, and very many good things happened, and it just was a joy. Some important lessons I have learned in life is my faith, family, and friends. Friends are as important to me as my family. One time, we were all at Kings Island having a good time. We decided to sit down and rest a little bit. I was sitting there, and my grandson, Jeff, come up to me and he says, "Grandma, smell this ice cream. It smells funny." So I leaned to go over to smell it, and he rammed it into my nose. And everybody had a good laugh over that.
Even you?
Yeah, even me. One thing I like to remember is I love going to all my children and their grandchildren's weddings, and I love to get up and dance. And that just seems to be a high. I still can do it, even at 98. I can get up and dance, and it is so much fun. My great-grandchild Gracie got married this last summer, and what a fun time that was. There I was, up on the dance floor at 98, still dancing. When I was young, I used to like to go to the movie now and then, and there were stars like Clark Gable, Jean Harlow, and all these old-time stars, and they're all gone now, and I'm still here. And in the music, oh my goodness, we had swing bands. There was Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman, and we'd get out on the dance floor and just dance away. And it was called swing music, but I preferred slow dancing, really. But it was a fun time. My favorite movie, probably Gone with the Wind. Don't know if I really had a favorite song, but I love Glenn Miller's band and all his music. I was 3 years old when the Great Depression hit, and I don't really recall that much about it, but as I grew a little bit older, I remember the bad times my folks had. My aunt, my mother's sister, lived in Cleveland, and her husband had a good job, and I can remember them bringing us food. And I can remember my dad working for the WPA, for the government, and it was just, actually, we were really poor, but I didn't realize we were poor because I think everybody was at that time, and I was just too young to realize how bad things really were. One thing I do remember, I was working at the Shelby Sales Book, and I was sorting through a box of when we'd ship business forms out, sometimes they would get mixed in these boxes, and we'd have to sort through them and correct them. And I was out in the box room going through this one box trying to find the mistake, and they come out and says, President Kennedy was shot. And I said, no, that can't happen. And but that's where I was working at the shop when I heard about President Kennedy. Oh, there was one thing that happened that was devastating in our family. And my brother that was next to me, Alan, when he was 30 years old, he contracted polio. And he not only had what they called bulbar polio, which attacked the lungs, but he had the spinal meningitis, or spinal polio. And they placed him in an iron lung, and this was so devastating to the family. And I can remember his wife going every day. We lived in Shelby, and he was in an iron lung in a hospital in Cleveland. And we had to go constantly up there to see him. And being placed in an iron lung, we'd walk in, and he would have this big grin on his face and smile when he'd see us. But I can't imagine how that would be to be in this iron lung. And he passed away from this polio. an iron lung helped them breathe. They was placed, and it was like a big drum, and he would be laying in this, and of course he couldn't move, and a lot of times they would even bleed from the nose, and I can remember they'd have like buckets catching his blood, and it was just so sad to see all this happen. But yet he was such a, before this happened, he was such a healthy guy, and he was such a happy guy. And this is what I can just remember, that him putting this big smile on his face when he was suffering so much. I think that the secret to long life is, one thing, a good attitude. Another thing is, for 20-some years I've had massages. Another thing is I've taken umpteen vitamins and supplements. I have always exercised, and I have just always had a positive attitude. And I think that really does help to live a long life. Today is January the 20th, 2025. And I just learned yesterday that I am going to be a great-great-grandmother. And I'd like to tell this child when it is born and can understand what I'm saying, is to always have a good, positive attitude and always be laid back, accept anything that comes your way, and always have a good faith in your God and our salvation in Jesus Christ. This is my advice to you, little baby.